Good day, everyone. For today, we shall discuss about the introduction to government accounting. For this topic, you'll have the desired learning outcomes. So, number one, you are to internalize the responsibility, accountability, and liability over government funds and property. Number two, you are to explain the basic government accounting and budget reporting principles. Three, you are to describe the financial reporting system of the national government and state what are responsibility accounting and its responsibility centers, and internalize the objectives of responsibility accounting. Always remember that for this topic, we are to discuss about responsibility, accountability, and liability over government funds and property. Remember that resources of the government shall be managed, expended, and utilized in accordance with laws and regulations. Of course, to avoid loss or wastage through illegal or improper disposition. So the person responsible over government funds and property mainly is the chief or the head of the government agency concerned. Remember that fiscal responsibility should be shared for all those exercising authority over the financial affairs, transactions, and operations of the government. Meaning, all those persons, all those government employees or officers that are in authority of a certain government fund or property shall be held accountable and responsible. For those persons as well who are entrusted with the possession or custody of the funds, they are also responsible and accountable enough for these funds. Every officer of any or government agency whose duties permit or require the possession or custody of government funds are held responsible for the safekeeping, of course, in conformance with the government rules and regulations. Remember, it is very important that all transactions of government officials, officers, employees should be in accordance to the law, meaning it should follow the law that prescribes the government transactions, the COA circulars, the DBM circulars. So dapat i-follow to niya. According to Section 75 of the Presidential Decree 1445 or the State Audit Code of the Philippines, whenever there are transfer of funds from one officer to another, except as allowed by law or regulation, remember that that transfer should have prior direction or authorization by the Commission on Audit or its representative. Remember that if there is a transfer of fund, there should be approval for such transfer. Also, according to Section 77 of Presidential Decree number 1445, when government funds or property are transferred from one accountable officer to another or from an outgoing officer to his successor, remember that there should be itemized invoice and receipt, meaning there is a proof of receipt that there is really that transfer in order for it to be supported and that outgoing officer be relieved of such obligation or accountability. So, it is a form of clearance of the outgoing officer for him to be relieved and no longer held accountable for the government fund and property that was once under his or her custody. Another thing, under Section 103 of PD 1445, expenditures of government funds or uses of government property in violation of law or regulations, meaning these are unlawful expenditures, meaning mga sobra-sobra or dili tama or um, unlawful na mga transactions, personal liability of it shall become a personal liability of the official or employee who has been found to be directly responsible therefore, meaning every officer accountable for government funds pag nagay nahitabo na unlawful na deposit, use, or application thereof, and there are losses attributable to it because of the negligence iyang gibuhat, that means that that person shall be personally held liable. So this means that a certain government officer should be knowledgeable of government rules and regulations for him to know what proper course of actions should be done for a certain government transaction. Another thing, dili pasabot na kay gisugo lang kasi muhang superior officer, then you are relieved of the liability. As stated in Section 106 of PD 1445, no accountable officer shall be relieved from liability by reason of having acted under the direction of the superior in paying out, applying, or disposing a fund or property, and then warag ano siya, nahimo siyang unlawful. So remember that even when it's just directed by your superior, still you are held accountable. Pero there are instances na dili ka mahimong accountable pag you have notified the superior officer in writing of the illegality of the payment application or disposition. Meaning, you know for the fact in yourself that that is not legal. And then you have notified your superior officer that there is illegality of the payment application or disposition of government funds. So in that case, you are no longer held responsible for it. Meaning, warag nag-inhibit ka in that certain transaction. So in that sense, the officer directing any illegal payment or disposition of the funds or property shall be primary liable for the loss, while the accountable officer who serves to serve the required notice, who fails to serve the required notice, shall be secondarily liable. So that's it. Now, what if there are losses of government funds and property? Meaning, in transit, there is a loss or gina-transit pa, gina-travel pa ang isa ka government property or fund. There was a loss caused by fire or theft, nakawat siya, casualty, or force majeure. Force majeure are kanang fortuitous events, meaning acts of God na dili nato kontrolado. So what happens? So the officer accountable therefore or having custody thereof shall notify the commission or auditor concerned within 30 days. So there is a certain number of days for which i-notify niya for such a certain loss or such longer period as the commission or auditor may in particular case allow. So kung say gi-allow niya or 30 days. So, bahimo siyang relieved from the accountability of that loss provided dapat na ay available supporting evidence. So, whenever warranted by the evidence, credit for the loss shall be allowed. Pero, if wala niya na na-comply, then he or she shall be held personally liable. Now, if we are to proceed, so we have now the basic government accounting and budget reporting principles. So, our government accounting, it is governed by generally accepted government accounting principles in accordance with PPSAS and pertinent laws, rules, and regulations. So, ang PPSAS, that is Philippine Public Sector Accounting Standards. So actually, this was harmonized from IPSAS, International Public Sector Accounting Standards, meaning these standards is crafted, patterned from our international counterpart, and we revise it and suited that to Philippine setting. So ang purpose ani is to what? To promulgate auditing and accounting rules and regulations para ma-facilitate ang keeping and enhancing information for the accounts of the government. Next is accrual basis of accounting in accordance to PPSAS. Pag musulit tag accrual, it means that events are recognized when they occur. Meaning, i-record nimo ang transaction not when the transaction is paid, not when the transaction is received. So, You recognize that whenever the transaction happened, regardless of whether cash is received or not. So, budget basis for presentation of budget information in the financial statements according to PPSAS 24 kanang it includes the presentation of budget information in financial statements. So, gina-compare na to dira ang katong budgeted amount versus the actual amounts. And if there are variances or differences, there should be explanations why that variance, why that difference. Next is RCA. Ang RCA, ang pasabot-an na revised chart of accounts. So, unsay purpose para ma-enhance ang accountability and to establish transparency of the financial reports and ensure comparability of financial information. Because of double entry bookkeeping, when you say double entry, there is debit. There is what the debit means what was received. Credit means kung unsa imuhang gihatag in return. Financial statements, you will have that later. And then fund cluster accounting. Remember that the government fund has been clustered by fund. So mura siya groupings of the sources of government fund na pwede kuwaan sa budget for a certain public expenditures. Now remember that each entity of the national government maintains complete set of accounting books. So kanang isa ka fund cluster na siya iyahang related accounting books. So based from the Section 8 of Government Accounting Manual, the financial reporting system of the Philippine government consists of accounting system on accounting accrual basis and budget reporting system. And the entities responsible for it are the national government agencies, the Bureau of Treasury, the Department of Budget and Management, and the Commission on Audit. So we all know for the fact that the COA, the Commission on Audit, maintains budget records and then consolidates the financial statements and ensures that the government transactions are in conformance to the prescribed rules and regulations. Tapos, remember that the Bureau of Treasury is the keeper of cash, and the DBM is for the budget. So, for later release, the DBM will issue special allotment release order, and then that serves as the obligational authority. So once it is implemented, the government agency will be needing the cash. So pag need na nila ang cash, ang DBM karon will issue. Sabi lang i-issue the notice of cash allocation. We will tackle more of that in the budgeting cycle. But for the meantime, kato, ang DBM mag-issue siya notice of cash collection or pasabot ana kanang national authority ang national government agency to disburse or make payments. So, the cash is kept in National Treasury, tapos ang BTR is the agency in charge. So once now it is needed, that there is the notice of allocation, and then the funds will be available now for the use and implementation of the national government agency. Tapos, on the other hand, the COA will do the audit of financial transactions in relation to the implementation of the plans or the budget as contained in the General Appropriations Act. Now, what for ang financial statements? We have discussed about the role of financial reporting. So, the output of financial reporting from recording up to the last step is the general purpose financial statement. So it's all about giving information about the position, pila naman ang asset, pila naman ang obligation sa government, even the performance. Is it generating income or the cash flow? Is there a deficit or surplus? So what for? It is for the making and evaluating decisions about the allocation of resources. This is also to determine the accountability of the entity for the resources entrusted to it. So makitaan po dira what happened to the operations of the head of agency together with his or her subordinate. Shall be responsible for the making of the FS. Of course, it is the head of the agency or the national government agency, and jointly responsible to him or her is the finance on and accounting division head. Now, there are certain qualitative characteristics of financial reporting. Now, it should be understandable to the general public, relevant meaning it is there when it's needed. It gives information relevant enough to make economic decisions. Materiality, the inclusion and omission of a certain financial data. Reliability, masaligan ba, tama ba ang imuhang financial statement, na ba siya'y mali or di ba siya kasaligan. Comparability, we can compare the previous year and the current year. And next to that is fair presentation, meaning truthful, meaning free from bias. You should state if it's compliant or there are departures, meaning deviations from the PPSAS. Going concern, meaning for a long period of time, even in perpetuity, the government will be there for the public. Consistency of presentation, meaning what was used before is still used today, meaning the methods used before for the last year shall also be used for the current year. But if there is a need to change, then if change will be useful, then it's all right. Materiality and aggregation of setting, comparative information structure, and content. So next are what are the basic general purpose financial statements. So we have here the statement of financial position, performance, the net assets on the equity, the cash flow, the comparison of budget and actual amounts, and the notes to financial statements, each of which, based from the government accounting manual, has its own annexes. That is from Annex A to Annex. We also have the books of accounts and registry. So these are the records, the documentation of the recording that is used for the financial reporting system for the national government. So the journal, we have general journal, cash receipts, disbursement, and checks disbursement journal. That's appendix 1 to 4. We also have the ledgers, the general, and the subsidiary ledgers. For registries, we will understand more of this in the budgeting concept. So registries of revenue and other receipts, appropriations and allotment, obligations, disbursement, and budget utilization and disbursement. Another thing, these are the components of budget and financial accountability reports. So from quarterly fiscal report of operation to quarterly report of revenue and other receipts. So that is based from Commission on Audit and DBM Joint Circular number 2014-1 dated July 2, 2014. Another concept that I will be giving to you, discuss to you, is the responsibility accounting. So, according to Chapter 4, Section 2 of the Government Accounting Manual, responsibility accounting refers to the provision of access to cost and revenue information. So, it is a system para ma-measure nato ang kung unsay kalahian, kung unsa ang variance sa katong gi-budget nimo compared sa imuhang actual results. The responsibility center, on the other hand, is a part, a segment, unit, or function for which it is headed by a manager. Meaning, responsibility accounting is the manner of checking, while responsibility center, that is a unit for which a certain cost dira nagikan, and there is a leader or there is a manager or head of the national government agency which is responsible for the government transactions in that particular government agency. So, sa may objective sa responsibility accounting. Simple, you are to check who is responsible, who should be held responsible for a certain transaction. That is to also facilitate review and monitor the performance of the responsibility center and evaluate. Tanaw na to, atong evaluate siya ang head, di ba? So siya ang namalakad, siya ang day-to-day, siya ang nagaproseso sa day-to-day operations. So responsibility accounting, okay ba? Tama ba? Nagampanan ba niya? Was it done effectively and efficiently? So that's the objective of the responsibility accounting. So remember that there are conditions existing for responsibility accounting. So tanaw na to ang specific level of management responsibility. So, tanaw na to ang organizational chart, kinsa man ang held responsible, kinsa man ang mga tao na ni-authorize, kinsa man ang mga tao na kanang naay dakong kalabutan for a certain or particular government transaction. And after that, let's see if kabalo na ta kinsa ang responsible, then we should analyze whether these costs and revenues are controllable. Controllable ba sila with which they are associated? And then, let's evaluate if katong course of actions na gibuhat sa manager or head of the agency, was it effective in controlling the cost and the revenues? Now, the concept of responsibility accounting is to distinguish the cost between controllable and non-controllable cost. Once we say controllable, meaning the nature of the government expenditure is dependent upon the top management or the head of agencies action, meaning controllable siya because it is related to a certain degree of authority coming from the head of the office. Meaning, kana siya na transaction is gi-authorized by a certain person or by a certain officer. While non-controllable costs are costs incurred indirectly, meaning ipasa lang siya, murag nalaanan lang kag a certain portion from for example, there is a general cost. So giapod-apod siya so to unit 1, to unit 2, to unit 3, meaning dili jud ikaw ang naga-control ato, meaning hatagan lang ka appeal ato na cost pero the decision was not based from the head of by that certain head or by that certain manager. With that, asa man ang ato ang tan-awon for performance reports? Is it the controllable or the non-controllable? So basing on the standard, performance reports should only consider items controllable by the individual manager. Dili na to apilon ang mga non-controllable, mga uncontrollable na mga cost because there is no issue of responsibility to that. There is the issue or concern in responsibility if it is controllable in nature. So, responsibility reports usually gina-compare na to ang actual ug ang iyahang budgeted data. So, in that sense, it's about budgeted goals versus controllable costs. And that is the end of the introduction to government accounting and its underlying fundamental principles and concepts. Have a good day.